Content hubs, what are they? Well, content hubs are the critical backbone of content strategy for big businesses. Essentially what these hubs are, ways of organizing content to be most effective to drive the business outcomes you want. The idea of a blog, although it doesn't have to be a blog, it could be a learn center, a resource center, etc. Essentially, it's a way to organize content that best matches the needs of your specific users and search very often in order to best drive the outcomes you want. So in this video, we're going to drill down on the specific methodologies that big businesses like Nerdwallet, Zendesk, Asana, and more use to realize their results via these hubs that power a big part of their strategy. If you like this video, we have other content just like it, tools reviews, content strategy in the SEO world, how to increase your website traffic, all the backbone of trying to move faster and rank quickly. So make sure you jam that notification bell, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content just like this. So we're gonna first dive into best practices and then further get into specific examples of best performing hubs that we can dig into and learn more from later in the video. So first, one of our favorite go-tos for hubs in terms of best practices is Help Scout. They essentially nail everything with their blog in terms of what we believe to be best practice, and it's something we frequently reference as an exemplar of great content marketing, as it were. So one of the old school archetypes of content marketing and blogs generally is that they would be newest to oldest. Animals had a great approach called making your blog a library and moving beyond this concept of newest to oldest. Essentially, users do not search or care to come to blogs in that way. Rather, they'd rather be brought to the content that is most relevant to them. So you can see here in the Help Scout example, they do lead with an area of most recent, but it's only a minimal part of that hub. This is actually a recommendation for most hubs, is to not make it comprehensively newest to oldest. Your industry may vary, but have a section for users should that be applicable, especially in industries that change more often. Something that's also great is if you have multiple buyer personas, immediately give them an option to jump to that above the fold. This will allow them to jump to the most relevant area for them, especially if they're a completely different size of organization in terms of your offerings to them. If you give them a lot of content that is essentially not relevant, that's not a great experience. That's why that immediate hit above the fold, which in their case is growth and culture and also customer service, this essentially allows you, as those two different buyers, to immediately get to content relevant to you. Something they also do well is essentially give you 15 plus pieces of content in order to check that out and make sure you have a good amount of content for users and Google close to your homepage. Essentially what we like to say is the closer content is to your homepage, the more likely it gets that link value that is most prominent in that page. So by being only one click, you get important content close to the homepage and get more value overall. Secondarily, with more options, that's just better for users overall. So if you give them several different things with low time to value in terms of browsing through that section, you're gonna be able to find content that's relevant to you. So it has a double-sided effect. As most SEO things do these days, it has a user relevancy and a Google relevancy at the same time. Another thing they do is have several editorial selections. So what this is essentially areas where you can manually, as the business, choose the articles you pick in that hub section. This allows you to pick content that converts well, is competitive, so you can get it better rankings, ideally some mix of both of those at the same time. Also is just relevant to users. It doesn't have to be search-driven content. Sometimes it could just be thought leadership type content. But this manually selected area as compared to the newest to oldest allows you to get the most performative content in front of users. Segmenting by different categories that you had above the fold is a good idea. Ideally, these would also be manually curated. Same idea. Does it convert well? Is it competitive? Is it tied to search? Giving them these options in a curative way for each of those major categories is going to drive a lot of outcomes for you. Something that Help Scout also does well is their thumbnails have visual interest and diversity. This maintains interest for the user and makes the blog hub enjoyable to scroll through and enjoy. That's going to drive more clicks and of course outcomes because of that as compared to a more standard stock photo look. Finally, including calls to action is just a no-brainer. Do suggest a subscribe call to action, given it's a hub or content section. People might want to see more of that. That's a very relevant place to put that. And also one, if not more, business call to action. at the end of the hub is very often a good best practice, as Help Scout does here as well. Two final elements sort of in the navigation mindset. One, on these hubs, we do suggest having it inherit the main navigation. In general, anywhere on your content section, we suggest inheriting the main navigation because this is good for SEO and also shopping experience. Essentially, if people can find this clearly, they're going to be able to be more likely to get to buying pages to drive the conversions you want. And also, if it's linked in an area that also has links, it will get more value according to the reasonable surfer model that describes this concept that if users are more likely to click something, it's more likely to be valued by Google. And the final element to an effective content hub is a search function. Help Scout has one here. It's not prominent, but we do think maybe making it a little bigger is not a bad idea. Very often people go to a hub or an index to find something. So by nature, having a search function is a good idea for user experience. It's at least prominent here, but a good general thought process for your content overall. And although I've said final a few times, I keep thinking of things to include here. So final point of what to do on these articles, on this section, is to think about hierarchy. We're talking about all the things that should include. Everything you include on a content section overall, the higher it is on the page, the more likely it is to get engaged with. So put your most important content first. If you're a highly changing, transformative business, maybe you want recent content up first. If you have a more popular category, put that first. If you have popular content, maybe you want to put that really high up. If you have one asset that really converts well, do the same. So those are all of our kind of like overall best practices encapsulated in this Help Scout index as of this viewing, but there's also some other good examples we'd love to have you run through on this video. One, we're biased, but heard of that Siege Media company. They're not too shabby. We have a pretty decent hub, inspired transparently by Help Scout and others like this. Not always do you need to reinvent the wheel, but you see here we can immediately jump to our core categories. We have a search function prominent on our hub. We have an editorial selection of core popular posts that we're being selective with in this area. We're not just highlighting one post, but you can see even in our featured area, we can see 4 posts. This gives users multiple selections if they don't care about what's being listed there. We then furthermore get into more editorial selections. So we've now seen 7 posts that are essentially all in our decision tree about what to include. That's going to be powerful for getting content that converts in this area. We then finally highlight most recent content in this section just to make sure that is getting piped in by default and algorithmically keep the content fresh. And we are a tech company, so it's relevant for us to have this on this section. We do have a call to action specifically for our podcast. Yours could be for your newsletter, what have you, but we have a prominent podcast. Go check it out. We'll link to it somewhere over here, and as well as our blog, and that can be something that is relevant for you. And then as you can see, we get into each specific category section. We specifically list 4 posts per section. We do think 3 to 4 is a good kind of way to do that. Obviously, you could have a big featured image or 3 smaller ones, or probably 3 medium-sized as we saw with Help Scout. And then we close when we get through all these core categories with another call to action for ebook. And finally, to go follow us on YouTube. I think you're on YouTube, maybe you're on LinkedIn if you're viewing this, but you don't, go check that out, go there. And that's kind of core of a high-performing hub as one example. Another good example we like is Nerdwallet in the personal finance space. Here they use this idea that we've been saying more often, and we didn't even do it on our blog, is the idea of jobs to be done. It's like, what are your users actually trying to accomplish compared to just like putting SEO? What you would do instead is increase website traffic or build my credit or start earning more money as they do with their areas above the fold. This is another way you could think about your categories to drive them to the things they specifically are trying to do as buyers to better drive engagement for your content. From there, they essentially hit all those same best practices, core categories, pops of color. They're using less images. This might also be helpful for performance. That ours, we do have several images. That can be a pro and the con. You can see they're actually doing that thoughtfully on their content section. And at their scale, I can see how it makes additional sense to be extra restrictive in terms of how many images they're showing on their content section. But you can see they have a latest section kind of further down, but the top is more manually curated, and they finally kind of edge it out with more quality content again, without images. They're thinking about site speed, and overall you can feel that in addition to the overall design, which is high quality for Nerdwallet, which is no surprise. Zendesk is another good one. We can see here above the fold, they immediately hit us with some editorial picks. They're also deciding not to use multiple thumbnails, but they still have that pop of color with the main featured image. You also get a subscribe CTA immediately, and then kind of drop into each core category in the same way we've seen with other sections. Also like that their nav follows you in terms of a call to action framework. And in their case, they kind of push down the buyer personas a little further, which your mileage may vary about your preference on that, but it's still good that they at least have that to jump to each category that is relevant to you. So that is powerful for getting users to the area they want, again, in a clean and high quality UX kind of way. And then finally, they decide to put their latest stuff at the very bottom. Probably makes sense, honestly, for many blogs because most people would not care to go in that order, but you also need to be really on top of curating the hub, because if you publish something that's important, you want to make sure it's highlighted appropriately, otherwise it might get buried on your site. And then they kind of round it out with the subscribe call to action. Do like a business call to action at the end, but they also do have that following you, so it's in a good place for their business. And then the final example is Asana. Their resources hub is solid. Something I like that we did not talk about in our best practices is just using a unique naming convention for this area. Essentially, it could be advice, work management resources, like what is the jobs to be done, as we sort of talked about, could also be how you describe your content section overall. That's something you want to be thoughtful with in this area. They've done it specifically with work management, and we can see here they also do the editorial selection. They are big and visual, so they use big images that might have site speed implications, but they have a lot of tech customers, so it's probably not too bad. Then they jump into their specific kind of like buyer persona areas of where you might want to go with content sections specifically. I like this. It's still clean. It has unique design. And even if they're not using heavy thumbnails, it's probably going to get users where they want to go. They then get into it by everything, newest to oldest in this section. It is a little long for my taste. I do like how you can filter by certain concept types to further dig in by section, but overall, a very effective hub for Asana and one that I like a lot. So those are our Content Hub best practices. Overall, it's making these hubs a place to curate things and organizing by most important to least important, driving in some calls to action and not being out of the box. That's the core part of a performative content hub, and making sure each step leads the user to the final step of the journey, as is the goal for you and your business. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, check out that content hub of ours, and let us know what you thought in the comments.